What if the biggest fool in the kingdom was actually the wisest person in the room? Tonight, our story begins not with a king on a throne, but amidst the vibrant chaos of a medieval fair, where the journey of our unexpected hero truly begins. It's always so wonderful to imagine where our stories are traveling as we start another evening together. I'd love to know where you're settling in from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. So, find a comfortable spot, let your worries of the day gently fade, and prepare to meet the surprising mind behind the fool's mask. Welcome to Sleeping Scribe, where calming history stories help you unwind and gently fall asleep. Tonight, we travel back to a time of lords and castles, not to witness a battle, but to uncover the secret life of the court jester. Let the quiet of your room be replaced by the distant sounds of a bustling fairground, the chatter of crowds, the strum of a faraway lute, and the scent of wood smoke in the air. Our journey starts in a field, muddy and trampled, on the outskirts of a town. This is no ordinary field. For a few weeks each year, it transforms into a world of its own. This is the Great Medieval Fair. It is a temporary city of canvas tents and wooden stalls, a dizzying explosion of life that draws people from 100 miles around. The air is thick with 1,000 competing scents. You can smell the sweet, heavy aroma of spiced ale warming in great cauldrons, mingling with the savory promise of a whole pig roasting on a spit, its skin crackling over the glowing embers. Beneath it all is the earthy smell of damp straw laid over mud, and the faint, dusty scent of wool from 1,000 moving bodies. This fair is the heartbeat of the region. It is a massive economic engine, a place where merchants trade in bolts of Flemish cloth, barrels of French wine, and precious spices from the distant east. But for our story, the most important trade is not in goods, but in talent. The fair is a grand, chaotic audition. It is the proving ground for every kind of performer imaginable, each one desperate to earn a few coins, a hot meal, or, if they were truly blessed, the attention of a wealthy patron. The sounds are a symphony of chaos. Merchants shout their prices, their voices rising and falling in a practiced rhythm. Children laugh and shriek as they chase a stray dog through the crowds, and everywhere there is music. But it is not a single, harmonious tune. It is a battle of melodies. In one corner, a minstrel plucks a mournful ballad on his harp, his voice telling a sad tale of a knight lost in a foreign land. Just a few yards away, a troubadour sings a more refined and complex song, a poem of chivalry and courtly love, hoping to catch the ear of a passing lady. And weaving through them all is the jongleur. The jongleur is the true jack of all trades, a whirlwind of energy and skill. He is not just a musician. He is an acrobat, a storyteller, a comedian, and a magician, all in one. He might begin by juggling brightly colored balls, sending them spinning high into the air. Then, he might swallow a flaming torch, to the gasps of the crowd. He could follow that with a puppet show, his hands bringing tiny wooden figures to life in a dramatic tale of a dragon and a princess. The jongleur's life was one of constant motion, a relentless pursuit of the crowd's fickle attention. These performers were the lifeblood of popular entertainment. These fairs were not random gatherings. They were meticulously scheduled events, often tied to important religious feast days. The Great St. Bartholomew's Fair in London, for instance, was a massive annual spectacle that lasted for weeks, a cornerstone of the city's calendar. Performers would travel a circuit, moving from one fair to the next as the seasons turned, their lives dictated by the calendar of saints and market days. In larger cities, their trade was even regulated by guilds, organizations that attempted to control who could perform, ensuring a level of quality and preventing the market from being flooded with too many entertainers. But this life was far from glamorous. The social status of these itinerant performers was incredibly low. They were wanderers, people without a fixed home or master. This made them objects of deep suspicion for the authorities, especially the church. They were seen as rootless, untrustworthy individuals, living on the fringes of respectable society. Their songs were sometimes bawdy, their jokes irreverent, and their lifestyle was a direct contrast to the settled, hierarchical world of medieval life. They were often accused of being thieves, spies, or worse. Life on the road was a constant struggle for survival. The roads between towns were poorly maintained and infested with bandits. A performer carrying a few days' earnings was an easy target. Disease was rampant, and a simple fever could be a death sentence far from home. And then there was the weather. A sudden downpour could turn a bustling fair into a muddy quagmire, ruining instruments and scattering the crowds, leaving a performer hungry and cold. They were truly at the mercy of the elements and the whims of fortune. It was from this desperate, competitive world that the court jester would emerge. Imagine a powerful lord or a wealthy knight riding through the fair with his entourage. He has seen 100 performers today. He is bored. He has heard the same songs, seen the same tricks, but then he spots someone different. Perhaps it is a jongleur whose jokes are not just crude, but genuinely witty and intelligent. Maybe it is an acrobat whose movements are not just skillful, but also comedic and full of character. Or it could be a musician whose satirical lyrics about the local sheriff are so clever that the Lord has to stifle a laugh. This is the moment of discovery. The Lord sends a servant to summon the performer. Standing before this powerful figure, the entertainer's heart would be pounding. This single encounter could change their life forever. If the Lord was impressed, he might offer them patronage. This was more than just a job. It was a complete transformation of their existence. To be taken into a lord's household meant safety. It meant regular meals and a warm place to sleep. It meant an end to the dangerous uncertainty of the road. As a sign of this new status, the performer would be given a livery. This was essentially a uniform, perhaps a tunic in the lord's specific colors, or a badge bearing his coat of arms. The livery was a powerful symbol. It declared to the world that this person was under the protection of a powerful man. A guard could no longer harass them, and a thief would think twice before robbing someone who belonged to the local baron. It was a shield against the harsh realities of the outside world. And so, our performer's journey begins. They have traded the mud and chaos of the fairground for the stone halls of a castle. They learned their skills not in a formal school, because no such thing existed, but through a lifetime of observation, practice, and relentless performance. Every trick, but now they must adapt their craft to a new, more complex, and far more dangerous environment. They are no longer just a jongleur. They are on the path to becoming something more, a professional fool. From this diverse sea of talent, a lord was looking for something very specific. He wanted an entertainer who could do more than just one thing. He wanted someone with a quick mind, a sharp tongue, and a unique personality. And in the medieval world, these unique personalities often fell into two very distinct categories. a fundamental distinction that would define the jester's entire role in the court. This was the difference between a fool by nature and a fool by trade. The first category was known as the natural fool. This was an individual who was born with a physical deformity, a learning difficulty, or what we would today understand as a developmental disability. In an age with little medical understanding, these individuals were viewed in a very particular way. They were often seen as innocents, perpetual children who were touched by God. There was a prevailing belief that because their minds were unfiltered by social convention, their words were a form of pure, unvarnished truth. Sometimes, their strange pronouncements were even interpreted as divine prophecy. These natural fools were not hired for their skills as performers. They were brought into the court as human curiosities, but also as cherished members of the household. They were often treated with a strange mixture of pity, affection, and superstitious awe. Their role was simply to be themselves. Their uninhibited laughter, their sometimes nonsensical observations, and their complete lack of deference to rank and power were a source of constant amusement and fascination for the court. They were living reminders of a world outside the rigid structures of hierarchy. A king might surround himself with advisors who told him what he wanted to hear, but his natural fool would tell him that his new crown looked silly, with no fear of consequence. A famous example of this type was Will Sommers, the beloved court fool of King Henry VIII of England. By all accounts, Henry, a notoriously difficult and tyrannical king, absolutely adored Will. He was provided with fine clothes, good food, and a warm place by the fire. When Will fell ill, the king himself paid for the best doctors. In return, Will Sommers was one of the very few people who could soothe the king's raging temper. His simple, honest presence seemed to ground the powerful monarch. He was less of an employee and more of a royal companion, a protected soul whose unique perspective was considered a valuable asset. On the other side of the spectrum was the artificial fool. This was a trained professional, an intelligent and witty entertainer, hired specifically for their talent. The artificial fool was not born a fool. They played the part of one. They were masters of their craft, skilled in music, acrobatics, storytelling, and most importantly, wordplay. Their humor was not accidental, but carefully constructed. They were sharp observers of human nature, and their job was to turn those observations into brilliant satire and comedy. The artificial fool had to be incredibly clever. They had to know how to poke fun at a powerful duke without causing a diplomatic incident. They had to be able to compose a witty song on the spot, read the mood of the room in an instant, and deliver a joke that was funny without being treasonous. Their entire career depended on a high-wire act of balancing entertainment with etiquette. They were playing a role, and their costume was the sign that the performance had begun. Perhaps the most legendary artificial fool was a man named Triboulet, who served two French kings, Louis XII and Francis I. Triboulet was famous for his razor-sharp wit, and stories of his cleverness have survived for centuries. Unlike Will Sommers, who was protected by his perceived innocence, Triboulet was protected only by his intelligence. His position was that of an employee. He could be celebrated one day and dismissed the next if his jokes crossed a line or if he simply failed to be amusing. The relationship was transactional. He provided wit, and the king provided payment and protection. The difference in how these two types of fools were treated was profound. The natural fool was often cared for like a child or a beloved pet. They were given gifts, and their well-being was a genuine concern of the lord or lady. The artificial fool, however, was a professional. They were respected for their skill, but they were always aware of their precarious position. A misstep could mean the loss of their job, banishment from the court, or, in the worst cases, a flogging or even execution. The stakes were incredibly high. Sometimes these lines could become blurred. A clever artificial fool might exaggerate a minor physical quirk, like a limp or a stutter, to gain some of the protected status of a natural fool. It was a subtle form of insurance, a way of creating a persona that allowed for greater freedom of speech. The court itself was a place of masks and performances, and the jester was simply the only one honest enough to wear a literal costume. The fascination with jesters was part of a broader cultural interest in human curiosities. Nobles would often collect people and things that were unusual, from exotic animals to people with unique physical traits, seeing them as status symbols. This fundamental difference between the natural and the artificial fool would even be reflected in their appearance. A natural fool might be dressed in a simple, oversized tunic, comfortable clothes that were easy to care for. But the artificial fool's costume was something else entirely. It was a carefully designed uniform, a symbolic outfit that announced their unique and complicated role to the world. And so, regardless of how they came to the court, once they were there, they were often defined by this iconic uniform. We now turn to the costume itself, a walking, jingling symbol of their strange and privileged place in the medieval world. The image of the court jester is inseparable from their costume. The brightly colored motley, the floppy hat with its bells, and the mock scepter are instantly recognizable. But this was not just a silly outfit designed to get a laugh. Every single element of the jester's attire was steeped in symbolism and served a very practical purpose. It was a uniform that simultaneously marked them as the lowest person in the room and granted them a power that no one else had. Let's begin with the fabric itself, motley. The word originally referred to a type of coarse woolen cloth woven with threads of multiple colors. It was not a high-status fabric. In fact, its mixed nature was symbolic. It represented someone who was of a mixed or lowly origin, a person who existed outside the clearly defined social hierarchy. A knight wore steel, a priest wore black, and a peasant wore plain brown homespun. The jester, in his chaotic blend of colors, belonged to no group. He was an outsider, and the very cloth of his clothes announced this to everyone. Then there was the iconic cap, known as a coxcomb. It was often designed with 2 or 3 drooping points, each tipped with a small bell. Frequently, the cap was shaped to resemble the ears of a donkey. This was a powerful and ancient symbol. Since the time of the ancient Greeks, the donkey, or ass, had been a symbol of foolishness, stubbornness, and ignorance. By wearing the ears of an ass, the jester was visually declaring himself a fool. He was preemptively taking on the label of the idiot, a clever move that disarmed his audience and lowered their expectations, making his subsequent displays of wit all the more surprising. The bells that adorned the cap, and sometimes the elbows and ankles of the costume, were not just for festive decoration. They served a critical function of self-preservation. The constant, gentle jingling announced the jester's presence wherever he went. This was crucial. It meant that no one in the court could ever claim that they were secretly overheard by the jester. If a group of nobles were whispering a treasonous plot in a corridor, the sound of approaching bells would give them fair warning to stop. This protected the jester from accusations of being a spy. His presence was always known, making him paradoxically one of the most transparent figures in the secretive world of the court. In his hand, the jester often carried a marotte or a bauble. This was his scepter of folly. It was a short rod, often carved at the top with a miniature head that was a distorted likeness of the jester himself, complete with its own tiny motley cap. This was a parody of the king's royal scepter, a mock symbol of power. In a world obsessed with symbols, this was a potent statement. The jester was the king of his own foolish world. The marotte was also a versatile prop. He could use it as a puppet, having conversations with the tiny head, or use it to playfully tap a pompous nobleman on the shoulder, a familiar gesture that no one else would dare attempt. The polished wood of its handle would grow smooth over years of use, a constant companion in his performances. The main body of the costume, the tight-fitting hose and doublet, was also designed with purpose. It was often split into two jarring, contrasting colors, a style known as mi-parti. One leg might be saffron yellow, the other royal blue. This visual clash was unsettling and attention-grabbing, reinforcing his status as an outsider. But the tight fit was also practical. It allowed for maximum agility. Jesters were often skilled acrobats, and their clothing needed to allow them to tumble, leap, and perform exaggerated physical comedy without restriction. The breathable linen and flexible wool were chosen for movement, not just for show. Even the jester's shoes were part of the act. In the later Middle Ages, it became fashionable for the nobility to wear absurdly long, pointed shoes known as crocows or pieds. The longer the point, the higher the wearer's status. The jester would often wear a parody of these shoes, with points so long they had to be curled back and tied to his ankles. It was a silent, walking satire on the vanity and excess of the very people he was paid to entertain. It is a common misconception that this elaborate costume was something the jester cobbled together himself. In reality, the jester's uniform was provided by the court's own household accounts. Surviving records show that these costumes were often made of high-quality, expensive materials. The court was investing in the jester's professional appearance. This fact alone elevates the jester from a mere servant to a recognized officer of the court, a specialist whose unique function required a unique and well-made uniform. Ultimately, the costume served as a form of license. By putting on the motley, the coxcomb, and the bells, the jester was stepping into a protected role. The uniform was a signal to everyone, from the king down to the kitchen boy, that the normal rules of speech and conduct did not apply to its wearer. It was a shield that allowed him to speak truth to power, to criticize the mighty, and to expose the follies of the court, all under the guise of foolishness. The psychological effect was profound. The costume instantly created a space around the jester, marking him as other, an observer who was part of the court, but not truly of it. The sight of saffron yellow and royal blue, and the constant jingle of bells, was a reminder that someone was always watching, and always ready to turn a secret into a joke. The costume was the outward sign of the jester's profession, a vibrant and symbolic shell. But it was the incredible range of skills contained within that shell that truly defined his value. It was this forgotten curriculum of talents that kept him employed, fed, and safe. We now begin our exploration of this curriculum, starting with a skill that was perhaps his most important, his role as a master musician. In an era before dedicated court orchestras or resident composers, the jester was often the primary source of musical entertainment within the castle walls. His musical proficiency was not a minor party trick. It was a core component of his profession. He was expected to be a highly skilled musician, capable of playing multiple instruments and possessing a vast mental library of songs for any and every occasion. One of the most common instruments in the jester's arsenal was the lute, with its pear-shaped body, bent pegbox, and strings made from sheep gut. The lute was the medieval equivalent of the acoustic guitar. It was prized for its portability, allowing the jester to carry it with him as he moved through the castle, from the great hall to the private chambers of the lord and lady. Its sound was delicate and expressive, perfectly suited for accompanying a singing voice. A single, clear lute note echoing in the cavernous great hall during a lull in the feasting conversation could capture the attention of the entire court. But the jester was rarely limited to just one instrument. He was often proficient on the viol, a bowed string instrument similar to a cello, which could produce sad, soulful melodies for more somber moments. For livelier occasions, he might play the pipe and tabor. This was a clever combination where one person could play a small three-holed flute with one hand, while beating a rhythmic accompaniment on a small drum with the other. The rhythmic tapping of the tabor was the sound of celebration, the perfect backdrop for a dance or a feast. The harp, with its angelic tones, was another common instrument used for epic poems and tales of romance. A jester was expected to have an enormous repertoire. He needed to know the heroic ballads and epic poems that recounted the great deeds of legendary knights. He needed to know the sweet and sorrowful love songs favored by the ladies of the court. And, of course, he needed to know the bawdy, humorous tavern songs that would appeal to the soldiers and squires after a few drinks. He was a living repository of the kingdom's musical culture, able to summon the right tune for any mood or event. Perhaps the most unique and dangerous of his musical skills was the art of the lampoon. This was the practice of creating satirical and often brutally critical lyrics about current events, court gossip, or specific powerful individuals. These new lyrics would be set to a popular, well-known tune, making them easy for everyone to remember and sing along to. This was the medieval version of a satirical news show. It was how information and criticism could be spread in a world without newspapers. Imagine the scene. After a great feast, the court is relaxed and merry. The jester takes up his lute. He begins to play a familiar love ballad, but the words are new. He sings a cleverly worded song about a visiting duke's ridiculous new beard, or the stinginess of the royal treasurer. The lyrics are packed with witty rhymes and double meanings. As the court catches on, nervous glances are exchanged, followed by stifled chuckles, and finally, a wave of collective laughter. The jester has successfully pointed out a truth that everyone was thinking, but no one dared to say. This was a powerful tool, but one that required immense skill and social intelligence to wield without causing a fatal offense. Music was woven into the very fabric of courtly life. It was not just for special feasts. It was used to pass the long winter evenings, to accompany private meals, and to soothe a moody or anxious monarch. A jester's ability to compose a song on the spot was highly valued. He might be called upon to create a ballad celebrating a recent victory in battle, a lullaby for a royal baby, or a mocking tune about a rival lord. His musical skill was a key part of his initial audition and a constant measure of his ongoing value to the court. He was not just playing notes, he was managing the emotional atmosphere of the entire castle. He could even gauge the court's mood by the songs that were requested. A sudden demand for somber ballads instead of lively dance tunes could be a valuable piece of information, a sign that political tensions were running high. Music was his art, but it was also his means of observation and survival. The scent of beeswax polish used to maintain his precious wooden instruments was the smell of his trade, a constant reminder of the dedication his craft required. Music was a powerful tool for the ears, a way to charm, to satirize, and to inform. But the jester was also a master of visual entertainment. His physical discipline was every bit as rigorous as his musical training, turning his entire body into an instrument of comedy, spectacle, and awe. We've seen how the jester began their career and started to build their toolkit. It's amazing to think about the sheer variety of skills they needed. As we get ready to explore more of their hidden curriculum, I'm curious, which of these foundational elements surprises you the most? The two types of fool, the symbolic costume, or their role as a serious musician? Feel free to share your thoughts. The music of the court was a vital part of the jester's world, a tool to soothe, to celebrate, and to satirize. But the jester's artistry was not confined to what the ear could hear. They were also masters of a language that required no sound at all, a language written with the body itself. Their physical discipline was just as rigorous as their musical training, turning their entire being into an instrument of comedy and awe. We now begin the first lesson in the jester's forgotten curriculum, where we explore how their very movements could tell a story, win a laugh, and captivate a king. The artificial fool was, above all else, a physical performer of extraordinary skill. In the great hall of a castle, with its stone floors and high vaulted ceilings, the jester's body was the main attraction. One of the most highly respected of these physical arts was tumbling. This was far more than a simple forward roll. A professional jester was an acrobat of the highest caliber, capable of performing sequences of handsprings, cartwheels, and somersaults with a grace and precision that would be impressive on a modern gymnastics floor. Imagine the sight in the flickering torchlight. A figure in motley leaps into the air, a blur of color, and lands perfectly in a balanced stance. Not a single bell on his costume making an unintended jingle. This required immense core strength, balance, and a lifetime of practice. It was a display of physical control that stood in stark contrast to the foolish character they were meant to be playing. Juggling was another essential skill, a classic act of the fairground that was refined to a high art within the court. A jester would begin with simple objects, perhaps brightly painted wooden balls or even apples snatched from the feasting table. But to truly hold the attention of a jaded audience, they had to escalate the danger and the difficulty. Soon, the balls would be replaced by gleaming knives, their edges catching the light as they spun in a complex, glittering pattern. The blur of the jester's hands would be mesmerizing, a testament to incredible hand-eye coordination and unwavering focus. The ultimate display was juggling with flaming torches, a dance with fire that filled the hall with the scent of burning pitch and the gasps of the onlookers. Beyond these spectacular feats, the jester was a master of the subtle art of mime and pantomime. Without speaking a single word, they could tell a complex story. They could become a pompous knight, puffing out their chest and striding with an imaginary sword. They could transform into a frightened maiden, her eyes wide with terror as she beholds an unseen monster. We can almost see the exaggerated, silent scream of a mime pretending to see a ghost, their whole body communicating a feeling that words could not capture. This was a universal language. In a court filled with foreign visitors and diplomats, a jester's silent comedy could entertain everyone equally, breaking down the barriers of language with a shared laugh. And that laughter was often earned through a form of comedy we still recognize today, slapstick. The name itself may have come later, but the concept was born in these medieval halls. It was a comedy of exaggerated trips, spectacular falls, and mock fights. A key prop was often an inflated pig's bladder tied to a stick. It was light, made a satisfyingly loud thwack when it hit something, and was completely harmless. A jester might engage a stern-looking knight in a mock duel. The knight with his heavy steel sword, the jester with his ridiculous bladderstick. The sight of the jester dodging and weaving, only to dramatically fall over or to land a loud thwack on the knight's polished armor, would send peals of laughter echoing through the hall. These were not the clumsy fumblings of a true fool. Every trip was a piece of precise choreography. This level of physical comedy requires a body that is strong, flexible, and resilient. A jester's career was a demanding athletic endeavor. They needed the stamina to be on call for hours during a feast that could last all day, performing between courses, ready to leap into action at a moment's notice. Court records from the era bear silent witness to this demanding work. We see entries for payments to repair a jester's torn doublet, or for the cost of a new pair of soft leather shoes, worn out from countless hours of tumbling and dancing on hard stone floors. Their work was, quite simply, physically punishing. Their repertoire also included the quieter arts of deception. Many jesters were skilled in sleight of hand, performing simple but effective magic tricks. They could make a coin vanish into thin air and reappear from behind a lord's ear. They could perform tricks with cards or cups that left their audience baffled and delighted. This added another layer to their persona, a touch of the mysterious and the uncanny that set them even further apart from the ordinary members of the court. The sheen of sweat on a performer's brow after a long routine was a testament to the effort involved. It was the mark of a true professional, an athlete, and an artist whose instrument was their own body. While their bodies were finely tuned instruments of comedy, their greatest and most dangerous weapon was their mind. The physical comedy could win a laugh, but it was their verbal skill that could win them influence and fame. We now move from the physical to the verbal, from the stage of the great hall to the razor's edge of wit, where a jester truly proved their worth and risked their neck. The air in the great hall grows thick with anticipation. The physical comedy has warmed up the crowd, but now comes the true test. The artificial fool steps forward, and a hush falls. This is the moment for the jester's most celebrated and most perilous skill, the mastery of language. Here, in the world of riddles, puns, and lightning-fast retorts, the jester was not just an entertainer, but an intellectual gladiator. Riddles were an immensely popular pastime in medieval courts. A good riddle was a sign of a sharp mind, and the jester was expected to be a master of the form. They would pose questions to the assembled lords and ladies, questions that played with logic and language, challenging the wits of the most powerful people in the kingdom. Successfully stumping the king with a clever riddle was a small victory, a way of demonstrating that intelligence was not determined by rank. Even more central to the jester's art was the pun, a way to speak dangerous truths while maintaining a shield of plausible deniability. A jester might make a joke that, on the surface, appeared to be about hunting or farming, but for those in the know, it was a sharp critique of a new royal tax or a commentary on a courtier's love affair. If confronted, the jester could always retreat to the more innocent meaning of the words. It was a high-stakes game of ambiguity, where the fool's cap was a license to say what no one else dared, as long as it was wrapped in a clever layer of wordplay. We can almost hear the sound of a collective groan from the banquet table, quickly followed by a ripple of laughter as the double meaning of a terrible but brilliant pun sinks in. This wit could not be scripted. The true genius of a court fool lay in their extemporaneous skill, their ability to conjure a clever reply in the heat of the moment. They were often drawn into a game called flighting, a verbal duel, or a contest of insults. A pompous courtier, perhaps emboldened by wine, might try to mock the jester. This was a fatal mistake. The jester's mind was a finely honed weapon, and they would unleash a rapid-fire volley of witty comebacks, rhyming insults, and clever observations that would leave the courtier speechless and the rest of the court roaring with laughter. This humor was never generic. A truly great jester was a master psychologist. Before speaking, they had to read the room, taking in the complex web of relationships, rivalries, and secret sensitivities. A joke that would delight the king might deeply offend the queen. A satirical comment that a duke would find hilarious could be seen as a mortal insult by a visiting bishop. The jester had to tailor their material constantly, adjusting their tone and topic based on who was present. They were, in a sense, the first stand-up comedians, and their audience was the most powerful and easily offended group of people imaginable. In a world without mass media, the jester was also a kind of cultural distributor of humor. They collected funny stories and jokes from traveling merchants, pilgrims, and soldiers, and then polished them for the court's consumption. A good joke, once told by the royal jester, would spread quickly through the kingdom, carried by courtiers and servants to other castles and towns. Their humor could be surprisingly diverse. Some of it was the earthy, bawdy comedy one might expect, but much of it was deeply satirical, cleverly structured, and intellectually demanding. In the great multicultural courts of medieval Europe, language proficiency was another essential skill. In the Holy Roman Empire, a fool might need to juggle multiple German dialects along with Italian and French. This linguistic dexterity made them even more valuable, allowing them to entertain foreign delegations and act as informal translators. This verbal jousting was not just for the amusement of the nobility. It was a way for them to sharpen their own minds, to practice the art of debate and rhetoric in a less formal setting. But we must not forget the immense mental pressure this entailed. From the moment they woke to the moment they slept, they were in the public eye, and a clever remark was always expected. The silence that followed a joke that fell flat was, to a jester, a sound more terrifying than any heckle. It was a professional failure that, if repeated, could lead to dismissal. We can imagine the intense look of concentration on a jester's face, even as they are laughing, as their mind races to formulate the next perfect, witty, and survivable remark. They needed a vast internal library of material, a well of knowledge from which to draw. This leads us to their most profound and underappreciated skill, their role as a scholar, a historian, and a storyteller with a truly formidable memory. In a world where books were rare, hand-copied treasures, and where literacy was the exception rather than the rule, a trained memory was a superpower. The court jester was often a living library, a walking repository of the culture, history, and news of the kingdom. This intellectual role is perhaps the one most at odds with the modern caricature of the jester as a simple idiot. But it was absolutely central to their profession. One of their primary duties was to be a reciter of stories and poems. This was not a matter of reading from a book, but of memorizing and performing incredibly long and complex works from memory. A jester was expected to know the great epic poems of their culture, such as the heroic tale of the asterisk Chanson de Roland asterisk in France, or the romantic legends of King Arthur and his knights in England. These were not short nursery rhymes. They were the medieval equivalent of blockbuster films, vast narratives with dozens of characters and intricate plots. The jester would recite these tales by the fireplace on long winter nights, their rhythmic, hypnotic cadence holding the entire court spellbound. Their performance was a feat of memory that could last for hours, a single person conjuring an entire world through words alone. Beyond these classic tales, the jester served as an oral newspaper. Castles and courts were often isolated, hungry for news of the outside world. The jester was a collector of information. They would listen to the gossip from the kitchens, the reports from soldiers returning from campaign, and the stories of merchants and pilgrims passing through. They would then weave this raw information into an entertaining and easily digestible narrative for their lord. While many in the court were illiterate, it was common for a professional, artificial fool to be able to read and write. They might be tasked with reading letters aloud to their lord, or with perusing official documents to provide a summary. The image of a fool in motley, carefully reading from a heavy leather-bound book is a far cry from the silly acrobat, but it was a regular part of their job. A jester was often expected to have memorized the complex family trees and genealogies of their own kingdom and of rival nations. This was crucial information in an age defined by strategic marriages, inheritance claims, and blood feuds. A jester who could instantly recall that a certain visiting baron was the third cousin of the king's greatest enemy was providing valuable real-time intelligence. Methods like the memory palace, where one mentally places pieces of information in the rooms of an imaginary building, would have allowed a jester to store and retrieve thousands of lines of poetry, hundreds of names, and countless historical facts. Their storytelling was a true performance art. They would use different voices for different characters, grand gestures to describe a battle, and dramatic pauses to build suspense. This deep knowledge of history and myth also made them surprisingly effective advisors. They could frame a current political dilemma in the context of a historical event or a cautionary tale. By recalling a precedent from the life of the king's grandfather, the jester could offer advice indirectly, couched in the safety of a story. The fool in Shakespeare's asterisk King Lear asterisk is the perfect literary example of this. With this full curriculum of skills, physical, verbal, and mental, the jester was now prepared for their ultimate stage. We now place our fully trained professional into the heart of power, the royal court itself, having mastered the arts of the body, the tongue, and the mind. The jester now faced their final ongoing examination, the daily challenge of surviving and thriving in the royal court, but also a treacherous landscape of shifting alliances, hidden rivalries, and volatile egos. Here, all the jester's skills had to be synthesized and deployed with psychological acuity and flawless timing. Success was not just about being funny, it was about being indispensable. The most critical skill in this environment was emotional intelligence. The jester had to be a master at reading people, particularly their patron. They had to be able to discern the monarch's mood from the subtlest of cues, the way they held their shoulders, the tightness around their eyes, the tone of their voice. To approach a king who had just received bad news with a light-hearted joke could be a career-ending, or even life-ending, mistake. The jester had to know when to be bold and when to be silent, when to offer a distraction and when to simply offer quiet companionship. We can picture a jester catching a quick warning glance from a queen across the hall, a silent signal that they are approaching a dangerous topic, and instantly changing their routine. In this tense and formal environment, the jester often acted as a social lubricant. Imagine a banquet table heavy with a sudden, awkward silence after a sharp disagreement between two powerful nobles. The air is thick with unspoken hostility. It is the jester's job to break that tension. They might do so with a sudden, loud pratfall, a ridiculous song, or a joke so silly that it forces everyone to laugh, dispelling the anger and allowing conversation to resume. They were the release valve for the immense pressures of court life. They had to know who was in favor and who was out. They needed to know of the simmering rivalry between the treasurer and the general, the secret affection a lady-in-waiting held for a visiting knight, and the king's deep-seated dislike for a certain foreign ambassador. This knowledge, a mental map of the court's emotional and political landscape, was essential for navigating their daily interactions and for crafting humor that hit its mark without hitting a landmine. This unique position often made the jester a confidant because they were seen as outsiders, as non-players in the game of power. They were often trusted with secrets. They were present in the private, unguarded moments of the royal family. They saw the king not just as a monarch, but as a worried father or a frustrated husband. They played with the royal children, comforted the queen after a difficult day, and heard the whispered conversations that were not meant for public ears. This made them keepers of an incredible amount of sensitive information, a position of both privilege and peril. Adaptability was therefore paramount. The jester had to be a chameleon. In the boisterous, male-dominated atmosphere of a post-hunt feast, they could be bawdy and raucous. In the queen's private garden, surrounded by her ladies, their humor would become more gentle and poetic. And in a moment of royal grief, they would put aside the jokes entirely, perhaps playing a somber melody on the lute, or simply sitting as a silent, comforting presence. This constant performance, this state of high alert, was exhausting. Even when not actively telling a joke or tumbling, the jester was being watched, their every action and word analyzed. The role of fool was one they could never truly take off. But for those who could master this final, most difficult art of court survival, the rewards were immense. A successful jester was not a disposable entertainer. They were a beloved institution. They might serve a single monarch for decades, becoming a trusted friend and an integral part of the royal household. Their ultimate test was longevity, and their prize was the quiet satisfaction of seeing a stressed and powerful monarch, burdened by the weight of a kingdom, break into a genuine, unguarded smile for the first time all day. Now that we understand the jester as a fully fledged professional, a master of a demanding and multifaceted curriculum, we are ready to see them perform their most important and dangerous duty, a role that went far beyond mere entertainment and into the very heart of politics and power. Of all the skills in the jester's curriculum, the acrobatics, the sharp wit, the incredible memory, and the political savvy, which one do you think would be the most difficult to maintain day after day in a royal court? It's fascinating to ponder the sheer mental and physical strength it required. We have assembled our professional fool. We have witnessed the years of training, the honing of the body into an instrument, the sharpening of the mind into a weapon, and the cultivation of a memory that served as a living library for the court. Now, with this complete and formidable artist, we can finally explore their ultimate and most vital function. To truly understand the jester, we must now watch them perform not on a stage, but in the shadowy corners of power. We must see them as a political operator, a counselor in motley, whose greatest performance was the delicate and dangerous art of speaking truth to power. This is the very heart of the jester's unique existence. In the rigid, terrified hierarchy of a royal court, the fool's license was a strange and sacred thing. It granted them permission to say what no one else would dare to even think. They were the living embodiment of the wise fool, an ancient archetype suggesting that profound wisdom can often be found hidden within apparent nonsense. Their seemingly chaotic ramblings and silly songs were often carefully constructed vessels for uncomfortable truths, delivering critiques and warnings that would have meant a swift execution for any other courtier. The jester functioned as a kind of royal safety valve, a king surrounded by advisors who would only tell him what he wanted to hear, was a king living in a dangerous state of ignorance. The jester was the one person tasked with puncturing this bubble of flattery by allowing criticism and dissent to be aired in the controlled, non-threatening form of a joke. A monarch could learn what their subjects were truly thinking and feeling. This prevented discontent from festering in secret, where it could eventually erupt into a full-blown conspiracy or rebellion. The fool's joke was a harmless release of pressure that could prevent a catastrophic explosion down the line. There is a wonderful historical anecdote that perfectly illustrates this function. In the 14th century, King Philip VI of France suffered a devastating naval defeat at the hands of the English at the Battle of Sluys. His entire fleet was destroyed. His advisors were paralyzed with fear, none of them willing to be the one to deliver the catastrophic news to their famously temperamental king. And so, the task fell to the court jester. He entered the king's chamber and began to mutter to himself, just loud enough to be heard. "Those cowardly English," he said, shaking his head. "Those faint-hearted English." The king, intrigued, asked him what he meant. The jester looked at him and said, "It's just that they didn't have the guts to jump into the sea from their ships, like our brave Frenchmen did." In one masterful sentence, the jester had delivered the terrible news, reframed the French defeat as an act of bravery, and given the king a way to process the information without immediately executing the messenger. This was the genius of their method. Humor was the spoonful of sugar that helped the bitter medicine go down. A harsh truth, when delivered by a grim-faced advisor, feels like an attack. But when delivered as part of a joke or a silly story, it becomes more palatable. It allows the recipient to save face, to laugh along, and to absorb the critique without feeling directly confronted. We can imagine the atmosphere in the room during such a moment. The tension is so thick you can almost feel its weight as a jester embarks on a story that is clearly aimed at the king's latest military blunder or his extravagant spending. The king sits, stroking his beard, his expression a perfect, unreadable mask. Every other courtier in the room suddenly finds the tapestries on the wall intensely fascinating, their eyes fixed anywhere but on the lonely fool in the monarch's gaze. The jester's voice is the only sound, save for the patter of rain on the stone outside the window. A somber rhythm for a dangerous monologue. And then, after a silence that stretches for an eternity, comes the feeling of pure, collective relief that washes over the room as the king finally lets out a short, sharp laugh, accepting the criticism and releasing the tension. Of course, this role was incredibly risky. The line between an acceptable jest and a treasonous insult was whispered thin, and it was constantly shifting based on the monarch's mood, the political climate, or what they had for breakfast. A king's reaction was also a public test of his own character. A monarch who could accept a jester's truth-telling was seen as confident, wise, and humble. One who punished the fool for his honesty was seen as a weak and insecure tyrant. The jester's performance was, in many ways, a reflection of the monarch's own greatness. In this capacity, the jester could also act as a rare and vital link between the ruler and the ruled. Often of common birth themselves, and free to move through all levels of the household, they could voice the concerns of the ordinary people, reporting on the mood in the nearby town or the struggles of the farmers in the fields. But this unique influence also made them a target. Other courtiers, desperate for the king's ear, might try to use the jester to spread rumors or attack their rivals. The clergy too often viewed the jester with suspicion, seeing their secular, worldly wisdom as a rival to their own spiritual guidance. Through it all, the jester bore the immense psychological burden of being the sole person responsible for delivering truths that could cost anyone else their head. To know what truths needed telling, the jester first had to be the most observant person in the kingdom. Their ears had to be open to every whisper, and their eyes had to see every subtle gesture. Their next crucial role was to act as a living barometer, constantly and silently gauging the ever-changing mood of the court. The court jester, in their quietest moments, was a master of observation. While their performances were loud and vibrant, their most important work was often done in silence, from a stool in the corner of the great hall. From this vantage point, they became a human barometer, sensitive to the slightest changes in the court's political atmosphere. Their role was not merely to entertain, but to gather information, analyze social dynamics, and provide their monarch with invaluable insights into the hearts and minds of their subjects. A skilled jester could be tasked with floating a controversial idea to test the waters. Suppose a king was considering a new unpopular tax. A formal announcement from his treasurer would be met with immediate and hardened opposition. A far more subtle approach would be to have the jester make a series of jokes about it during a feast. "I hear the king plans to tax the air we breathe," he might quip, "and charge double for those who sigh too much." The reaction to this joke was pure data. If the nobles laughed heartily, it suggested the policy might be tolerated. But if the joke was met with a stony, uncomfortable silence, it was a clear and powerful warning sign that the king was approaching a dangerous line. Their unique status and freedom of movement made them natural information gatherers. Unlike a nobleman who was confined to the high-status areas of the castle, the jester could go anywhere. They could listen to the unvarnished opinions of the soldiers in the barracks, the gossip of the cooks and servants in the kitchens, and the worries of the stable hands. They collected these disparate threads of conversation and wove them into a coherent tapestry that showed the true mood of the kingdom. This made them an incredibly effective, if informal, intelligence agent for their patron. Beyond words, they were masters of reading nonverbal cues. In a world where everyone wore a polite and guarded mask, the jester was trained to see the truth behind it. They noticed the nervous glance between two lords when a certain topic was raised. They saw the tightening of a lady's hand on her wine goblet when a rival entered the room. They registered the subtle, forced quality of a smile. To the jester, the court was a silent theater of gestures, and they were its most astute critic. Their seemingly idle chatter was often a carefully crafted tool, a series of innocent questions designed to elicit information from courtiers who would let their guard down around the harmless fool. A conspiratorial whisper exchanged between two nobles across the room would be instantly clocked, analyzed, and filed away. The jester could map the rise and fall of various factions simply by observing who laughed at whose expense. If a joke mocking the king's general was met with widespread laughter, it was a sign that the general's influence was waning. If the same joke was met with silence, the opposite was true. This was a deep and intuitive practice, requiring a profound understanding of human psychology and the intricate dance of social power. The information they gathered could be of monumental importance. By sensing brewing discontent, a jester could give their monarch the early warning needed to prevent a rebellion. By overhearing a snippet of a suspicious conversation, they might uncover a conspiracy. As the candles burned low and the smell of melting beeswax filled the air, the court's conversations would deepen, and the jester's observation would become even more focused. This was a constant, mentally exhausting task. It meant they could never truly relax, never let their guard down. Every moment was a performance, and every conversation was a potential source of vital intelligence. But in this world of shifting alliances and constant observation, the jester was never truly neutral. They were not a machine for processing information, but a human being with their own loyalties, friendships, and enmities. Their personal relationships could be just as complex and dangerous as any other courtiers, adding another layer of intrigue to their already complicated life. While the jester's official role set them apart from the court's rigid hierarchy, they were still a part of its human ecosystem. They formed deep and complex relationships, navigating a social landscape where a trusted friend and a dangerous rival could be sitting at the same banquet table. Their life was not just a performance, it was a delicate dance of personal connection and political survival. Often, the most significant relationship a jester had was with the monarch they served. Over years of shared meals, private conversations, and constant companionship, the professional relationship could deepen into a genuine and profound friendship. The jester was one of the few people who saw the monarch not just as a king or queen, but as a human being. We can imagine a quiet conversation late at night, long after the rest of the castle has fallen asleep. A weary king, burdened by the affairs of state, sits by the fire with his fool, the only two people still awake. In this quiet moment, the masks of king and jester could fall away, allowing for a rare and honest exchange between two trusted friends. They also frequently formed special bonds with other members of the royal family. They might be particularly close to the queen, offering her a light-hearted escape from the stiff formality of her role. For the royal children, the jester was often a magical figure, a source of games, stories, and laughter. We can picture a shared, secret smile passing between the jester and a young princess during a long, boring official ceremony, a small moment of connection that makes the tedious affair bearable. As someone who existed on the fringes of power, The jester could also become a fierce protector of the powerless. They might use their unique influence and their wit to speak up for a servant who had been unjustly accused, or to subtly expose the cruelty of an overseer. Their voice could be the only one a humble kitchen maid had in the halls of power. Their rivals, however, were often the most powerful people in the court. The king's formal advisors, the clergy, the generals. The ministers often saw the jester's informal influence as a direct threat. These men dealt in strategy, law, and theology. The jester dealt in intuition, humor, and public opinion. When the king chose to listen to his fool's advice over theirs, it was a deep and bitter insult. The cold, hard stare of the king's treasurer after the jester makes a clever joke about missing funds from the royal coffers was a look that promised retribution. A clever jester could use their platform to dismantle a corrupt official, slowly and carefully, with a series of well-aimed jokes that exposed their incompetence or greed. But this was a dangerous game. A powerful courtier might try to fight back, attempting to bribe or threaten the jester into becoming their pawn, using them to spread malicious rumors about a rival. Navigating these currents required incredible skill. The jester's ultimate loyalty had to be to their patron, but ignoring the animosity of other powerful figures was a recipe for disaster. The bitter taste of wine in a goblet might suddenly feel threatening, a terrifying reminder that they had enemies who would not hesitate to remove them permanently. For those who navigated this social maze successfully, the rewards were a testament to the genuine affection they could earn. Historical records show jesters being given generous gifts of land, comfortable pensions for their retirement, and tokens of personal esteem, like the warmth of a fur-lined cloak, a personal gift from the queen on a cold winter's night. Yet, for all these potential connections, the role could also be a profoundly lonely one. To be the only one of your kind, to be forever the outsider looking in, was the inherent paradox of the jester's life. And for all their wit, their alliances, and their careful observations, the jester walked a razor's edge every single day. One wrong word, one joke that cut just a little too deep could mean the end of their career, and sometimes the end of their life. This is the story of the jester's ultimate and ever-present risk. We arrive now at the heart of the jester's courage. For all their skills and protections, their existence was profoundly fragile. Their license to speak freely was not a right, but a privilege, one that could be revoked in an instant at the sole whim of their master. The line between a celebrated jest and a capital crime was invisible, and it was drawn in a different place every single day. The story of the court jester is not complete without confronting the grim reality of what happened when the joke failed. Perhaps the most famous story of a jester's dance with death is that of Triboulet, the fool, to the French king Francis I. Triboulet had made a joke that deeply offended a powerful courtier who threatened to have him killed. The jester appealed to the king for protection. The king, amused, told the courtier that if he harmed the fool, he would be executed 15 minutes later. However, the king then turned to Triboulet and warned him that he, too, had been offended by a different joke. He sentenced the jester to death, but in a moment of royal grace, he offered him a choice. Triboulet could decide the manner of his own execution. It was a terrifying, impossible choice. But Triboulet, a master of wit to the very end, paused, thought for a moment, and replied, "Good sire, I choose to die of old age." The king was so taken aback by the brilliance of this reply that he burst out laughing. He commuted the death sentence to banishment and the quick-witted fools survived. But not all were so clever or so lucky. History is filled with the quieter stories of jesters who misstepped. For every tribalette who talked his way out of death, there were others who were publicly flogged for a joke that displeased their lord. Many were simply dismissed, cast out of the warmth and safety of the court, and thrown back into the harsh, uncertain world of an itinerant performer. A change in power was a particularly dangerous time. A new king would bring in his own court, and he might have little patience for the beloved fool of the monarch he had just replaced. The jester's close relationship with the old king could mark them as an enemy to the new one, and their enemies within the court were always waiting. A rival who had been the target of the jester's satire would seize on any opportunity, any joke that fell flat, to whisper poison into the king's ear. "It was not a jest, your majesty," they might say. "It was treason." The psychological toll of this constant threat must have been immense. Every performance, every joke, every story carried with it the potential for ruin. The fall from grace, when it came, was swift and brutal. One day, a jester could be a cherished royal favorite, dressed in fine silks. The next, they could be an outcast, walking alone down a muddy road, the castle walls receding into the distance for the very last time. A notable example was Archibald Armstrong, the jester to two English kings. He went too far when he insulted the powerful Archbishop of Canterbury, a key ally of the king. For this, he was stripped of his title and banished from court, a powerful reminder that even the king's favorite was not untouchable. It is this inherent, ever-present risk that makes the jester's role as a truth-teller so truly remarkable. Their words were not just clever, they were courageous. They spoke their truths, knowing that the laughter they received could, at any moment, curdle into a chilling, deadly silence. The sudden halt of conversation in a boisterous hall, the sight of the monarch's face slowly hardening as the humor drains from their eyes, the heavy, deliberate sound of a king pushing his chair back from the table, these were the signals that the performance was over. The fool's license had just expired. The tale of the active jester, with their triumphs and their terrifying risks, has reached its conclusion. But the story doesn't end here. The legacy of these remarkable individuals would echo through the centuries, long after the role itself had vanished from the courts of Europe. And so, our journey with the court jester, the master of art and politics, comes to a gentle close. We've seen that behind the motley costume and the painted smile was a mind of immense sharpness and a spirit of incredible courage. They were the tightrope walkers of the medieval world, balancing between humor and heresy, entertainment and execution. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most profound wisdom can be found in the most unexpected of places. As we drift now from the main halls of our story, I wonder which aspect of the jester's political life you found the most compelling: the truth-teller, the spy, or the survivor. Your thoughts are always a welcome part of our shared exploration. For now, just relax and let the story continue to unfold in its own time. The curtain has fallen on our jester's final, most dangerous performance. We have walked with them through the mud of the fairground, studied with them in their secret curriculum, and stood beside them on the perilous stage of the royal court. Their story, as a living profession, has reached its conclusion, but their spirit, their echo, still resonates through the halls of history. And so, in this final part of our journey together, we transition into a gentle, quiet reflection. The pace of our story slows now, the details becoming softer, as we explore the long shadow cast by these remarkable figures. Let us begin by visiting with some of the most famous jesters who ever lived, listening to the whispers of their lives, and understanding how they became legends. Our thoughts drift first to Tudor England, to the grand and often terrifying court of King Henry VIII. Amidst the political turmoil, the religious upheaval, and the king's own volcanic rages, there was a point of quiet calm, a gentle soul known as Will Sommers. He was, by all accounts, the most beloved of all the court jesters, a man whose kindness and disarming honesty earned him a place not just in the court, but in the king's heart. Will Sommers entered the king's service around the year 1525, and he would remain there for the final 2 decades of Henry's tumultuous reign, a constant and soothing presence through some of the most dramatic years in English history. Will was what was known as a natural fool, a person whose unique perspective was seen as a gift. But his true gift was not one of sharp, satirical wit, but of profound empathy. The king, especially in his later years, was a man in constant pain. A jousting accident had left him with a festering leg wound that would never heal, and his physical agony often manifested in terrifying fits of temper. Courtiers, and even his own family, would flee from his presence. But it was in these moments that Will Sommers would draw near. We can imagine the sound of his soft, calming voice cutting through the tense silence of the grand, drafty chambers of Hampton Court Palace. A gentle word or a simple, honest observation being the only thing that could reach the king in his fortress of pain. Contemporary writers, like the chronicler Robert Armin, who was also a famous actor of Shakespearean fools, wrote of Will Sommers with genuine admiration. He described him as a friend to the powerless, someone who would use his unique position to help others. There are many stories of him intervening on behalf of a person who had fallen out of the king's favor, using a carefully worded jest to remind the king of his own capacity for mercy. He was a quiet advocate for the forgotten, a gentle conscience in a court obsessed with power and ambition. The king's deep affection for him is not just the stuff of legend. It is recorded in the dry, factual language of the royal household accounts. These records show lavish sums being spent on Will's wardrobe, on garments of rich velvet and soft fur, identical in quality to those worn by the highest nobles. This was a clear and public statement of his value. He was not a servant, he was a treasured companion. Such was the love for Will Sommers that his career did not end with the death of his formidable master. After Henry died in 1547, Will continued to serve in the royal court, a beloved link to a previous era. He brought his gentle presence to the short, troubled reign of the boy king, Edward VI, and then to the court of Henry's eldest daughter, the staunchly Catholic Queen Mary I. To have been cherished by 3 such different monarchs, a volatile Renaissance prince, a Protestant boy, and a devout Catholic queen, speaks volumes about his remarkable character. He was a figure of unity and continuity in a deeply divided age. His status was so great that his portrait was painted by the master artist Hans Holbein the Younger, the king's own painter, in the famous painting of Henry VIII and his family. Will Sommers is there, standing in an archway, looking out at the viewer. He is depicted with a quiet, gentle expression, a calm observer of the grand pageant of royalty. He came to represent the idealized natural fool, a figure whose simple, unvarnished honesty was more valuable than all the clever flattery of the ambitious courtiers who surrounded the throne. The most poignant stories of Will Sommers are those from the king's final days. As Henry lay dying, consumed by pain and fever, Will was a constant presence in the royal sick room. The air would have been thick with the scent of herbs and medicines, a heavy, somber atmosphere. It is said that Will did not try to make the king laugh, but simply sat with him, his presence a comforting balm, gently drawing the king's attention away from his suffering with quiet stories and observations. He was not just an entertainer, he was a friend, providing comfort to the very end. After his own death, many years later, he was buried with honors in London, and his memory was cherished for generations as the fool who had tamed a tyrant with the simple power of kindness. In the peaceful atmosphere of a private palace garden, where the king and his fool might once have walked together, we can feel the gentle, warm legacy of a man who proved that the softest voice can often be the most powerful. From the gentle fool of the English court, our thoughts now drift softly, like a leaf on a slow-moving stream, across the Channel to France. Here, in the glittering, opulent world of the Renaissance, we meet a jester of a very different and far sharper kind. His name was Triboulet, and his razor-edged wit and fearless intellect would make him a legend. Triboulet served two French kings in the early 16th century, Louis XII, and most famously, the great patron of the arts, Francis I. He was a man of small stature who lived with a condition known as microcephaly, which gave him a distinctive physical appearance. But while he may have looked the part of the fool, he was an artificial fool of the highest order, a man whose mind was his greatest gift and his most dangerous weapon, unlike the gentle Will Sommers, whose humor was a soothing balm. Triboulet's wit was a surgeon's scalpel, used to cut through the arrogance and folly of the powerful. The French court of Francis I was a dazzling place, a center of European culture. We can imagine the scene, the great hall of a magnificent chateau, perhaps at Blois or Fontainebleau. The stone walls are covered in vast, intricate tapestries depicting heroic battles and ancient myths. The ceilings are a forest of gilded carvings. The air is alive with the low murmur of French, the rustle of silk gowns, and the clinking of wine goblets. It is scented with expensive perfumes and the rich aroma of roasting meats. In the flickering glint of 1,000 candles, the jewels of the assembled courtiers sparkle like captive stars, and into the center of this world steps the small figure of the jester, to hold them all in his thrall. Triboulet's legend is built on stories of his incredible audacity. He was known to keep a calendar of fools, a list of people who he felt had committed acts of profound stupidity. One day, he cheekily added the name of a powerful nobleman to the list. When the nobleman angrily confronted him and threatened him, Triboulet simply replied that if the nobleman did anything to him, he would erase his name and write in the king's name instead, for it would be the height of folly for a king not to protect his fool. This was the essence of his genius, to use logic and wit as a shield and a sword. His most famous story, the one that has become the defining legend of the wise fool, is the tale of his escape from execution. As we heard before, when the king sentenced him to death but allowed him to choose the manner of it, his witty reply that he chose to die of old age so amused the monarch that his life was spared. Whether this event actually happened is debated by historians, but its survival as a story is what truly matters. It encapsulates the core fantasy of the jester, that a brilliant mind and a clever tongue can triumph over the absolute life or death power of a king. His sharp wit was most often aimed at the proud and the arrogant, which made him a popular figure with the less powerful members of the court. He was a great leveler, a voice that could puncture the pomposity of a visiting duke or a self-important bishop. His continued and celebrated employment by Francis I, a highly intelligent and cultured king, shows just how much this intellectual sparring was valued during the Renaissance. The king did not want a simple clown. He wanted a whetstone on which to sharpen his own wit. The story of Triboulet has echoed through the centuries, a testament to the power of his archetype. He became the central character in a famous play by the French writer Victor Hugo, which in turn was adapted into one of the world's most famous operas, Verdi's Rigoletto *. In these later portrayals, his story becomes a dark tragedy, but at its heart is the figure of the truth-telling fool, whose intellect sets him apart from all others. He has become the enduring symbol of the cunning, fiercely intelligent jester, forever walking the fine line between amusing his master and offending him into a murderous rage. In our imagination, we can still see him, a small man standing fearlessly before the tall, powerful figure of his king, armed with nothing but the power of his words. These real-life jesters, both the gentle and the schwarkt promd, were such compelling and complex figures that their archetype found its most enduring home not in the stone halls of a castle, but on the wooden boards of a stage. The spirit of the fool was captured, perfected, and immortalized by the greatest playwright of the English language, William Shakespeare. As our thoughts drift now to the world of late Elizabethan England, let us imagine a different kind of building, not a palace, but a theater. Perhaps it is the famous Globe, an open-air playhouse with a thatched roof. The air smells of old wood, damp earth, and dusty curtains. The light is not from 1,000 candles, but from the soft, gray glow of a London afternoon, perhaps with the gentle sound of rain beginning to fall. It was on this simple stage that the court jester was transformed from a real person into a timeless literary idea. William Shakespeare was writing during a time when the tradition of the court jester was still a living, breathing part of English culture. He would have seen these performers, heard their jokes, and understood the complex role they played. This first-hand knowledge gave his fools an authenticity and a depth that has allowed them to endure for over 400 years. His jesters are almost always the wisest and most perceptive characters in their plays. Let our thoughts turn first to Feste, the fool in Twelfth Night *. Feste is a perfect example of the professional, artificial fool. He is a wandering entertainer, a brilliant singer, and a master of wordplay, who moves between the households of the play's nobles. He is a keen observer of the foolishness of those around him, especially their foolishness in love. But there is a deep and profound melancholy that runs beneath his wit. His beautiful songs, like Come Away, Death, are filled with a sense of weariness and the passage of time. Feste reminds us that the life of a professional entertainer, dependent on the whims of the wealthy, could be a tiring and uncertain existence. Then there is Touchstone, from the play As You Like It, *. He is a courtly fool who accompanies his exiled masters into the rustic forest of Arden. Touchstone is a creature of pure logic and cynical wit. In the idealized, romantic world of the forest, he is a constant voice of grumpy realism. He uses his sharp, analytical mind to deconstruct the foolishness of romantic love, of pastoral poetry, and of the very idea that life is better in the countryside. He is the ultimate insider, using his courtly sophistication to prove that people are just as foolish in a forest as they are in a palace. But perhaps the most profound and memorable of all Shakespeare's fools is the unnamed fool who accompanies the title character in the great tragedy of King Lear. King Lear. The fool in King Lear is not just an entertainer. His memory and his tether to reality. From the very beginning of the play, after Lear has foolishly banished his one good daughter and given his kingdom to her evil sisters, the fool speaks the truth. He does so through riddles, rhymes, and seemingly nonsensical songs. But every word he speaks is a bitter and accurate critique of the king's monumental error. He calls the king a fool for giving away his crown, and he never stops reminding him of the truth, even as the king descends into a storm of madness and grief. Then, a strange and poignant thing happens. Midway through the play, after Lear has lost everything and has begun to achieve a new, terrible kind of wisdom through his suffering, the fool simply disappears. His last line is, "And I'll go to bed at noon." He is never seen or heard from again. The literary debate over his disappearance is endless, but one beautiful interpretation is that he vanishes because he is no longer needed. His job was to speak the truth to a king who could not see it. Once Lear himself has become a fool in the eyes of the world, and has finally begun to see the truth for himself, the fool's purpose is complete. In the hushed silence of the theater, as the audience is captivated by the fool's poignant prophecies, we understand that we are witnessing the very soul of the jester's function. These literary fools, brought to life by celebrated actors of the day like Robert Armin, immortalized the wise fool archetype, ensuring that its wisdom would survive long after the real jesters had vanished from the courts of Europe. The fading presence of the fool on the stage was a mirror of their slow and quiet disappearance from the courts of the real world. The jester did not vanish in a single dramatic moment. Instead, the profession gradually faded into history, like a familiar song whose melody slowly recedes until it can no longer be heard. As the world changed, the unique set of conditions that had created and sustained the medieval court jester slowly dissolved. The first quiet toll of the bell for the jester's era was the invention of the printing press. In a world where news and ideas had once traveled by word of mouth, the printed page was a revolution. Satire, social commentary, and criticism no longer needed a single licensed voice in the king's ear. They could now be mass-produced in the form of pamphlets, poems, and newsletters, and distributed far and wide. The jester's role as an oral newspaper and a singular safety valve became less essential when dissent had a new and powerful medium. We can imagine a courtier in a quiet window seat, chuckling at a printed satirical pamphlet in a moment that in a previous century would have belonged to the jester. As the Renaissance gave way to the Age of Enlightenment in the 18th century, tastes and philosophies began to shift. The new emphasis on reason, logic, and scientific thought made the old medieval style of humor seem old-fashioned. The elaborate puns, riddles, and allegorical stories of the classic jester were seen as frivolous and unsophisticated by a new generation that prized rational argument and clear, direct language. The very structure of power was also changing. The personal, almost familial courts of medieval monarchs were slowly replaced by more formal, sprawling, and bureaucratic systems of government. The informal, intimate, and personal influence of a court fool had less and less of a place in a world of official ministers, written memoranda, and complex state departments. In some countries, like England, the rise of Puritanism in the 17th century cast a long, sober shadow over courtly life. Theatricality, music, and overt entertainment were viewed with deep suspicion, seen as decadent and immoral. This austere new mood was inhospitable to the flamboyant and often bawdy figure of the court jester. The last officially recognized court fool in Britain was dismissed during the reign of Charles I, just before the English Civil War swept away that entire world. In France, the tradition held on a little longer, but it too withered away, finally dying out around the time of the French Revolution, which destroyed the very monarchy that had been the jester's home. The role of the jester did not truly disappear so much as it fractured, breaking apart into more specialized and modern professions. The need for music was met by the court composer and resident musicians. The need for literary prestige was met by the poet laureate. The need for political commentary was met by a new generation of writers and satirists. The jester had been a jack of all trades, and in a new world of specialists, there was no longer a job description that could contain their unique combination of skills. Some aristocrats in the 18th and 19th centuries kept individuals they called fools, but this was largely a form of nostalgic affectation, a self-conscious attempt to recapture a lost world. The original role, with its genuine power and its profound risks, was gone. We are left with the quiet, melancholy image of a jester's colorful, motley costume hanging in the back of a dusty wardrobe, unused. The great hall, where music and laughter and daring truths once echoed, is now quiet. A chapter of history has gently, peacefully closed. And so, the historical figure of the court jester takes a gentle bow and recedes into the mists of time. Their legacy, however, is woven into the very fabric of our culture, in our stories, our plays, and in our understanding of the delicate dance between power and truth. The fool may have left the court, but the spirit of folly and wisdom combined never truly left us. As we continue to drift and unwind, let's explore where that unique spirit might be found today. Just allow these thoughts to wash over you, with no pressure to follow, simply enjoying the quiet of the journey. The great, heavy doors of the past have swung gently closed. Our journey through the real, historical world of the medieval jester is complete, and the figures of Will Sommers and Tribulette have taken their final bows, receding into the soft, respectful silence of history. But a spirit as vibrant and as vital as the jester's does not simply vanish. It is too essential, too deeply woven into the fabric of the human experience. And so, for this last final part of our time together, we will allow our thoughts to drift to meander without a set course, through the landscape of the modern world, listening for the faint, distant echo of the jester's bells. This is a gentle, speculative journey, a final, soothing meditation on where that unique spirit of wise folly might be found today, living on in new costumes and on very different kinds of stages. Let our thoughts drift first into a dark, quiet room. It is a place of low, murmured conversation and the gentle, intermittent clinking of glasses. The air is cool and still, and at the front of this room there is a small, empty stage, bathed in the soft, warm glow of a single spotlight. Into this circle of light steps a lone figure, holding not a lute or a bauble, but a simple microphone. This is the modern stage of the stand-up comedian, and it is perhaps the most direct and recognizable echo of the court jester in our world. The comedy club, like the royal court, is a special, almost magical zone, a temporary space where the normal, polite rules of discourse are gently suspended. For the time that the comedian is on stage, they are granted a license, a permission to speak on topics that are otherwise uncomfortable, taboo, or simply too fraught for everyday conversation. The comedian, much like the artificial fool, is a professional observer. Their art is built upon watching the world around them with a keen and critical eye, noticing the small absurdities of our daily lives, the strange illogic of our social conventions, and the great, glaring hypocrisies of the powerful. They hold up a mirror, not to a small group of courtiers, but to all of society, and in that reflection, we are invited to laugh at ourselves. When we listen to the great observational comedians, we feel a sense of recognition, a comforting reassurance that we are not alone in noticing how strange the world can be. That feeling of shared understanding, which manifests as a gentle, rolling wave of laughter from an unseen audience, is a powerful and ancient form of connection. The greatest of these modern jesters have always been truth-tellers. Figures like George Carlin or Richard Pryor were not just joke-tellers, they were philosophers and social critics whose chosen medium was humor. They used their protected space on the stage to dissect the language of politics, to question religious dogma, and to expose social injustice with a clarity and a courage that was often absent from more formal kinds of commentary. Their microphone became a modern marat, a symbol of their authority to speak freely, a scepter of their own small, temporary kingdom of truth. And just like the jesters of old, they used humor to make the most bitter truths more palatable, allowing us to confront difficult ideas because we were too busy laughing to put up our usual defenses. We can see a faint echo of the jester's lampooning in the modern tradition of the roast, where a public figure agrees to be satirized by their peers. In this ritual, the powerful person demonstrates humility and a sense of humor, allowing their ego to be playfully dismantled for an evening. And just like the court jester, the modern comedian must be a master of reading the room. They must sense the mood of the audience, feeling the subtle shifts in energy, knowing when a joke has landed and when it has not, and adjusting their performance in a constant, intuitive dance. The risk they face is not execution, but a modern kind of banishment. In our world, this might be cancellation, a public backlash, or simply the cold silence of an audience that has turned against them. The fall from favor can still be swift and unforgiving. Even the lifestyle of a touring comedian carries a faint echo of the past. The lonely miles on the road, traveling from city to city, from one anonymous club to the next, is a modern version of the itinerant life of the early jongleurs, who wandered from fair to fair, their lives a constant search for a welcoming audience. The comedian is the outsider, paid to come into our town for a night, to make us laugh, to tell us some truths, and then to disappear again down a dark highway. They are our temporary, truth-telling fools. But the jester's truth was not always spoken. It could be captured in a single, silent image. And so, our thoughts now drift away from the dark stage of the comedy club and into a quiet, well-lit studio, a place where the fool's critique is practiced, not with the voice, but with a pen. Let us now imagine a different kind of artist, one who works not with an audience in front of them, but with a clean, white sheet of paper. We can almost hear the quiet, satisfying scratch of a nib pen as it moves across the smooth surface, leaving a trail of dark, permanent ink. This is the world of the political satirist, the cartoonist, another of the jester's spiritual descendants. Here, the complex and often infuriating world of politics is distilled into a single, witty image, continuing the jester's vital tradition of critique in a different and powerful medium. This tradition is a long and noble one. We can picture the bustling, chaotic streets of 18th century London, and imagine a crowd gathered around the window of a print shop, marveling at the latest savage cartoon by an artist like James Gilray. His drawings were merciless, depicting kings, queens, and politicians as grotesque, foolish figures, exposing their vanity and corruption for all to see. In the 19th century, satirical magazines like Britain's Punch or its many European counterparts created a regular space for this kind of visual jesting, a weekly court where the powerful were held accountable by a team of clever artists and writers. This tradition continues today in newspapers, on websites, and in publications around the world, a constant, necessary check on power. The core of the cartoonist's art is caricature, the skill of exaggerating a person's physical features to reveal a deeper, inner truth about their character. A politician's long nose might be drawn to represent their lies, or a general's oversized jaw might be used to symbolize their aggression. This is a visual form of the jester's wit, a way of getting to the essence of a person or an issue with a single, powerful stroke of the pen. The final image, a complex argument captured in a moment, has the same power as one of Tribolet's perfectly aimed barbs. In our own time, this tradition has expanded into the moving image. We can picture the soft, flickering glow of a television or a computer screen late at night as we watch a satirical news program. Shows like The Daily Show, or Last Week Tonight, have created a new kind of court. The host acts as the chief jester, blending real journalism with sharp comedy to dissect the events of the day. For many people, these shows are more than just entertainment. They are a vital tool for making sense of a confusing and often overwhelming world. They provide the same function as the medieval jester, a necessary outlet for public frustration, a way to laugh at things that might otherwise make us weep. And like the jesters of old, these modern satirists must be incredibly well-informed. To create a truly effective piece of satire, one must have a deep and nuanced understanding of the topic at hand. The cartoonist or the television host must, in their own way, be a living library, consuming vast amounts of news and history to ensure their critiques are not just funny, but also true and relevant. And they too face risks. Their work can provoke lawsuits, public condemnation, and in some tragic and terrible cases, violence. To wield the jester's pen requires the jester's courage. In a world saturated with information, the satirist's gift is to bring clarity. The pleasant, distinct smell of fresh newspaper ink is the scent of a long tradition, a reminder that the fool's powerful, clarifying voice is still with us. The jester's spirit, however, is not confined to our entertainment or our politics. It also inhabits a much deeper, quieter, and more ancient realm. It is an echo found in our oldest stories, our most profound symbols, and our deepest understanding of the human journey. And so, we now drift away from the noise of the modern world and into the timeless, archetypal silence of the fool. Let us imagine now that we are holding a single, smooth, worn playing card in our hand. It is the Fool, the first and most mysterious card of the Tarot's major arcana. He is numbered 0, the number of pure, unlimited potential. The image on the card is of a joyful, brightly dressed young traveler, walking with a light step towards the edge of a great cliff. He is not looking where he is going. His gaze is turned up towards the sky, towards the heavens, full of innocent trust. A small white dog, a symbol of loyalty and instinct, gambols at his feet. The fool is about to take a leap of faith into the great unknown, and he is not afraid. This powerful, ancient image is the archetypal soul of the jester. It represents the beginning of any great journey, a moment of leaving the known world behind and stepping into a future that is unwritten. This figure of the sacred fool echoes through the myths and legends of countless cultures. Many traditions have what are known as trickster gods, divine beings who embody the spirit of the fool. We think of Loki in the Norse tales, a shapeshifter and a rule breaker whose chaotic actions often lead, unexpectedly, to the creation of something new and valuable for the other gods. We can think of Anansi, the spider, the clever and mischievous hero of West African folklore, who uses his wits to outsmart those more powerful than himself. Or we can think of Coyote, the sacred clown of many Native American traditions, whose stories are often humorous, but always contain a deeper lesson about the right way to live. These divine jesters cross boundaries, challenge authority, and remind us that the universe has a playful, unpredictable, and creative side. This same spirit can be found in a more mystical context. In the Orthodox Christian tradition, there is the figure of the Holy Fool, or the Fool for Christ. This is a deeply spiritual person who feigns madness or foolishness, renouncing all worldly goods and conventions, in order to challenge the pride and complacency of society, and to express a deeper, more profound spiritual truth. Like the court jester, the holy fool uses the mask of folly to speak truths that would otherwise not be heard. They wander through the world, existing in the quiet, ancient stillness of sacred places, their lives a constant, walking prayer. In the language of psychology, the fool is a powerful archetype that lives within us all. It is connected to our inner child, to the part of us that remains curious, spontaneous, and open to the wonder of new experiences. It is the voice that encourages us to take a chance, to learn a new skill, to travel to a new place. The narrative of the fool's journey, where an innocent protagonist sets out into the world and gains wisdom through trial and error, is one of the most fundamental story structures we have. It is our own life story. The archetype of the fool reminds us of the wisdom in humility, of the courage it takes to embrace the unknown, and of the profound limitations of a purely rational, predictable life. It represents the part of us that can still be touched by the sound of a gentle breeze, and see it as a promise of the peaceful, cleansing winds of change. Having journeyed through the courts of kings, the modern stage, the pages of satire, and the timeless realm of myth, our long and winding story now comes to its final, quiet, resting place. We have searched for the echo of the jester in the world all around us. But the last, and perhaps most important, echo is not to be found outside, but within. Let us close our journey with a final, soothing meditation on the wisdom of the jester that we can carry within ourselves. The last lesson of the fool is not a grand historical truth, but a simple, personal one. It is about the gentle, healing power of not taking ourselves or the world too seriously. Think of the last time you enjoyed a truly deep, genuine laugh, the kind that starts in your belly and leaves you feeling warm, light, and connected to the people you are with. That comforting, wonderful feeling is a physical manifestation of the jester's legacy. It is the simple biological magic of humor, a force that can reduce our stress, calm our fears, and foster our deepest bonds. The spirit of the jester lives on in the simple act of humility, in the ability to laugh at our own mistakes and imperfections. The need to always be right, to always appear perfect and in control, is a heavy burden. The wisdom of the fool is the liberating feeling of letting that burden go. To admit when we have been wrong, to make a joke at our own expense, is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of profound strength, self-awareness, and confidence. It is a quiet, peaceful smile of recognition at our own shared, imperfect humanity. In the tradition of Zen Buddhism, there is a concept known as beginner's mind. It is the practice of approaching a subject or a situation with an attitude of openness, eagerness, and a lack of preconceptions, just as a beginner would. This state of mind, free from the arrogance of expertise, is the very essence of the archetypal fool. It is the wisdom of being willing to say, "I don't know," because this is the only way that true learning can ever begin. The jester's spirit encourages us to cultivate this gentle curiosity in our own lives. It is the power of playfulness, the recognition that a light heart and a playful attitude can be our greatest assets in creativity, problem solving, and simply navigating the challenges of daily life. To embrace our inner fool is to give ourselves permission to be silly, to experiment without fear of failure, and to find joy in the process rather than just the outcome. It allows us to view our setbacks not as tragic ends, but as comical missteps on a much longer, more interesting journey. Ultimately, the final legacy of the fool is the understanding that true wisdom is not about having all the answers. It is about never being afraid to ask the questions. It is about finding the strength in vulnerability, the clarity in humility, and the deep, profound peace that comes from accepting the world and ourselves with all our beautiful, ridiculous, and wonderful flaws. As we settle into a state of deep and final rest, let the soft, gentle rhythm of your own calm breathing be the last quiet echo of the jester's playful drum. And so, our story of the medieval jester comes to its final, quiet resting point. From the boisterous fairgrounds to the silent halls of history, and finally to the peaceful corners of our own minds. The fool has played his part, spoken his truths, and now takes a final, gentle bow. The bells on his cap have ceased their jingling, leaving only a profound and peaceful silence. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey tonight. It's truly a pleasure to share these stories with you. If you've enjoyed our time together, a like or a subscription is always deeply appreciated, as it helps our small community to grow. But for now, the most important thing is for you to rest. Let the echoes of the jester's tale fade into the background. May your mind be calm, your body be comfortable, and your sleep be deep and restorative. Until next time, sleep well.